I'm loving every minute. I'm present for it. What Fred would feel about this is gratitude. I really do.
He was the man who made generations feel safe with just a smile and a soft-spoken word. But now, at 92, Fred Rogers' widow has finally decided to speak. And what she reveals is nothing like the picture-perfect image we all remember. Behind the cardigans and kindness was a truth never shown on TV. Get ready to hear the side of Mr. Rogers the world never saw until now. The quiet legend on TV. He made children feel safe, but there was more behind that gentle smile of Mr. Fred. Fred Rogers didn't look like a television pioneer. He wasn't loud. He didn't wear flashy costumes. He never cracked jokes for laughs or relied on over-the-top characters. Yet somehow, he changed the very nature of children's television, one calm, thoughtful episode at a time. When Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood first aired nationally on PBS in 1968, it was unlike anything else on television. There were no laugh tracks, no fast edits, no cartoon explosions, just a quiet man walking through a door, changing into a cardigan and sneakers, and asking a simple but powerful question: "Won't you be my neighbor?" For Fred Rogers, the show wasn't about entertainment. It was about connection. At a time when most children's programs focused on high-energy play or teaching letters and numbers, Fred focused on feelings. He believed children deserved honesty. They deserved to be talked to, not talked down to. And so, across the show's 895 episodes, he did exactly that. He tackled topics many adults avoided: death, divorce, war, race, self-worth, and disabilities. And he did it gently, through conversations, songs, and make-believe puppets that helped children process a confusing world. Fred Rogers wasn't just speaking to kids, he was speaking with them, meeting them right where they were. When a goldfish died on the show, it wasn't brushed aside. Fred explained what death meant. When he talked about being scared, he validated fear rather than dismissing it. That honesty helped kids feel seen. For many, Fred Rogers was the only adult who treated their emotions as real and worthy of understanding. The show also featured the whimsical Neighborhood of Make-Believe, where puppet characters like Daniel Tiger, King Friday, and Lady Elaine explored challenges children faced in their own lives. Fred voiced many of these characters himself, pouring different parts of his personality into each one. While Daniel expressed vulnerability, King Friday often reflected authority and stubbornness, both sides of human experience. For over 3 decades, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood stood as a quiet counter to the noise of modern life. It wasn't just a TV show, it was a daily ritual for millions. Children across America and later, the world, found safety in Fred's slow pace, kind tone, and belief that every person had value just the way they are. But that consistent warmth didn't come without effort. Behind the scenes, Fred was meticulous. Every word, every pause, every movement on the show was intentional. He believed in the power of silence and used it to help children think. His approach may have seemed effortless, but it was the result of deep emotional labor. He carried the emotional weight of being a steady presence for children who needed him, many of whom were facing challenges in their own homes. Yet even as he nurtured the hearts of millions, Fred carried quiet burdens of his own. Worries, doubts, and emotional strain never showed through the screen, but they existed, tucked behind the camera, shared only with his closest confidant, his wife, Joanne. Let's meet the woman who shared every burden Fred carried and knew him more deeply than anyone else ever could. The woman behind the sweater. Before she was ever known as Mrs. Fred Rogers, Joanne Bird had already carved out a meaningful life of her own. Born in 1928 in Jacksonville, Florida, Joanne was raised in a household that valued curiosity, conversation, and, most of all, music. From a young age, she was recognized as a piano prodigy. But music wasn't just her talent, it was her language. Through it, she expressed joy, sorrow, humor, and everything in between. By the time she enrolled at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida, Joanne had already become a standout musician. At Rollins, she pursued a degree in music performance and quickly earned a reputation not only for her technical skill, but for the depth and emotion in her playing. She wasn't just another gifted student, she was a force, independent, smart, and deeply grounded in who she was. It was at Rollins where she met another music student, a soft-spoken, introspective young man named Fred Rogers. While he was quiet, Joanne noticed there was something different about him. He didn't need to fill the room with noise. Instead, he listened, he paid attention, he spoke with sincerity. They connected not through grand gestures, but through shared piano benches, long rehearsals, and deep conversations. Their connection grew steadily, like a duet, not a solo act. While Fred left for New York to begin his early career at NBC, Joanne remained in Florida, focusing on her music and teaching. They married in 1952, beginning a partnership that would last over 50 years. But this wasn't a picture-perfect fairy tale. It was a real, human relationship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Joanne wasn't just Fred's wife. She was his sounding board, his mirror, and his emotional anchor. She supported his mission wholeheartedly, even when it meant letting Fred step into the public light while she stayed in the background. Still, Joanne's life didn't revolve around being someone's spouse. She continued her career as a concert pianist, performing in a piano duo with her friend Janine Morrison. They recorded albums, toured together, and received national recognition. She also taught music at several institutions, sharing her gift with young students and encouraging a new generation of musicians to find their voice. Those who knew Joanne described her as witty, grounded, and full of warmth. She had a way of speaking that was disarmingly honest and filled with insight. She could make you laugh with a sharp one-liner and then turn around and offer a perspective that made you stop and reflect. Her intelligence, humor, and emotional clarity helped balance Fred's often heavy emotional load. At home, their marriage was a quiet symphony. They raised two sons, James and John, and built a life that reflected their values, music, honesty, kindness, and thoughtfulness. Joanne took on many of the parenting responsibilities, especially when Fred's work consumed his energy. She understood his sensitivity, his emotional intensity, and his drive to serve others, and she never tried to change him. She simply stood by him. For Fred, Joanne wasn't just a partner. She was the one person in the world who understood all the layers beneath the sweater, the doubts, the dreams, the fears, and the strength. Their bond wasn't about being flawless. It was about being true. Together, they created a quiet love story that didn't seek applause, just authenticity. People aren't always exactly who they appear to be, and the same was true for Fred Rogers. Today, we're going beyond the cardigan to reveal the real man behind the gentle smile. The real Fred Rogers. Fred wasn't flawless. He was disciplined, quiet, and deeply thoughtful. But underneath his gentle tone was a man carrying the emotional weight of the world around him. Every child's question, every parent's story, every letter he received about pain, divorce, loneliness, or fear, Fred felt it all. He wasn't just acting kind on camera. He truly cared. And that care came with a cost. Behind the scenes, Fred carried a strict sense of routine. He weighed himself every single day, maintaining a precise weight of 143 pounds, a number that held deep meaning for him. To Fred, it symbolized the words, "I love you," one letter in I 4 in love, and 3 in you. It wasn't a coincidence. It was part of how he lived, deliberately, symbolically, and with deep purpose. For Fred, life was about small gestures that carried great meaning. But living up to the image that millions held of him wasn't easy. Joanne Rogers, who stood beside him for over 50 years, once shared that while Fred truly was kind, his kindness wasn't automatic. It was a choice, one he made again and again, even when he was tired, even when he was overwhelmed. That's what made it real. Fred didn't float through life on clouds of perfection. He wrestled with sadness, self-doubt, and the quiet burden of constantly being seen as a role model. There were days when the pressure left him exhausted. As gentle as he was on screen, Fred sometimes struggled in his personal life. He often internalized the emotions of others and found it difficult to disconnect. He wanted to help everyone, and when he couldn't, it weighed heavily on him. Joanne revealed that he could become withdrawn at times, not out of coldness, but from sheer emotional fatigue. He carried other people's pain like it was his own. Even in their marriage, which was rooted in deep love and understanding, there were challenges. Joanne admitted that she was often the one who handled the discipline of their 2 sons. Fred, with his gentle heart, found it difficult to be firm. His softness, while beautiful, wasn't always practical in the chaos of daily family life. But instead of breaking under those differences, they leaned into them. Joanne became his anchor, the one who grounded him when the emotional waves got too strong. Fred's sense of responsibility wasn't just toward his family, it was toward the entire generation of children who looked up to him. He believed every child deserved to feel heard, loved, and safe. But that mission didn't pause when the cameras stopped rolling. He took those worries home. And that's where Joanne played her most vital role, not just as a wife, but as his quiet protector. A safe space where he could finally put the emotional weight down. Most recently, Fred's widow decided to open up, and what she revealed were some truly heartbreaking details about the quiet struggles Fred carried throughout his life. The awful truth he carried. Fred Rogers spent his life helping others feel safe, understood, and loved. But in the final chapter of his life, he quietly carried a pain that even his most devoted fans never saw. Behind the gentle smile and warm cardigan, Fred was fighting a battle that he chose to face quietly. It was a battle not just with illness, but with time, mortality, and the weight of saying goodbye. In 2002, Fred was diagnosed with stomach cancer, a disease that progressed faster than anyone expected. At first, it started as what he believed to be minor discomfort, some indigestion, fatigue, and subtle aches he brushed aside. But as the pain worsened, Fred and Joanne finally sought medical help. The diagnosis was devastating. The cancer had already spread. Yet, Fred didn't make his illness public. In fact, he continued to appear at public events, holding on to his quiet strength and sense of duty. One of his final appearances was as Grand Marshal of the 2003 Rose Parade in Pasadena, just weeks before his passing. Even as his body grew weaker, he stood tall, smiling and waving, offering one last message of peace and love to the world that had adored him for decades. In a 2018 interview featured in the documentary Won't You Be My Neighbor, Joanne Rogers shared painful, heartfelt memories of those last few months. She revealed that Fred's illness brought with it moments of deep vulnerability and quiet reflection. He was a man used to carrying other people's pain, but in his final days, he had to come face to face with his own. Joanne described how Fred, ever composed on the outside, would sometimes sit at the piano when the pain was too much. Even in his final weeks, music gave him comfort. He would play, not with the goal of performance, but as a way to speak the feelings he couldn't put into words. "There was a peace that settled in when he played," Joanne said in the interview, her voice full of emotion. He underwent surgery to remove part of his stomach, but his condition continued to deteriorate. Eventually, Fred returned home to spend his last days surrounded by family. On February 27, 2003, he passed away quietly, just one day after his grandson's birthday. It was a loss that shook millions, but only a few knew just how much he had endured behind the scenes. For years, Joanne chose to remain silent about the details of Fred's final days. She protected his privacy, just as she always had. But in time, she realized that sharing the full truth could bring comfort and connection to others. In that same 2018 documentary and later interviews, she began to open up, offering the world a more complete picture of the man behind the legend. Joanne revealed that being Fred's caregiver in those final months was both beautiful and painful. Their roles had shifted. He, who had always been the steady one, now leaned on her for strength. She recalled nights sitting beside him, holding his hand, reassuring him that their sons would be okay, that she would carry on. One moment Joanne shared has stayed with many who watched her interview. In one of their final conversations, she told Fred, "We're going to be all right." She wanted him to know that he could let go in peace. "So when he went," she said, "I could feel he went at peace, and even with joy." Her decision to finally speak about this time wasn't about breaking the myth of Fred Rogers. It was about deepening it. By sharing his pain, his struggle, and his quiet courage, she reminded the world that even the kindest souls are not immune to suffering, and that true strength sometimes means allowing others to see your humanity. Why she chose to speak now. When Fred Rogers passed away, the world mourned the loss of a gentle soul who had been a steady presence in the lives of millions. But for Joanne Rogers, the loss was far more personal. She didn't just lose a cultural icon, she lost her husband, her closest confidant, and the quiet force who had shared her life for over 5 decades. While the world wanted answers, tributes, and closure, Joanne chose silence, not out of fear, but out of deep love, respect, and grief. For years, Joanne remained mostly behind the scenes. She allowed Fred's public memory to rest exactly where it had always been, in the hearts of viewers. But she wasn't idle. In the background, she worked tirelessly to protect and preserve his legacy, not as a myth, but as the very real man she had known. As chair emerita of Fred Rogers Productions, Joanne made sure Fred's mission of kindness, emotional awareness, and compassion lived on through new generations. The most visible result of that work was the creation of Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, an animated spin-off series that took the same core values of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and reimagined them for modern children. With gentle stories, meaningful songs, and messages about feelings, Daniel Tiger quickly became a favorite for families around the world. It wasn't just a show. It was a bridge connecting Fred's vision to the future. Joanne's work went far beyond organizational leadership. Over time, she stepped into the public eye, appearing in interviews, documentaries, and even films to offer insights that no one else could give. In the 2018 documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor?, Joanne provided rare, touching reflections about Fred's personal life, his emotional struggles, and their private conversations. Her voice brought a richness to the story, a depth that made Fred's compassion even more powerful. Joanne also appeared in the 2019 film A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, starring Tom Hanks as Fred. Though her role was small, it was deeply symbolic. By simply being present, she helped lend authenticity and approval to a film that aimed not just to portray Fred Rogers, but to capture his heart. Still, Joanne kept many of the most personal truths close to her chest. For a long time, she wasn't ready to talk about the harder moments: Fred's declining health, his vulnerability, his private fears. But as she grew older, she came to believe that people needed to understand that side of him. She once said in an interview, "I think the more people know about the real Fred, the more they'll appreciate the effort it took for him to be who he was." That's why, in her early 90s, Joanne finally began sharing the full story. Not just the cardigan-clad host with the comforting voice, but the man who came home exhausted, who wrestled with self-doubt, who sometimes cried at the dinner table, and who needed the love and support of his wife to keep going. When we think of Fred Rogers, we often recall the soft-spoken man in a cardigan, gently tying his sneakers and asking, "Won't you be my neighbor?" But Fred Rogers left behind more than just episodes of a television show. He left behind a philosophy, quiet, powerful, and centered around love. And nowhere is that philosophy better captured than in the simple sequence of numbers, 143. For most people, numbers are just that, digits without deeper meaning. But to Fred Rogers, 143 meant everything. It was more than a code. It was a message, a mantra, and a moral compass. It stood for the phrase, "I love you," one letter in I, 4 in love, and 3 in you. It was poetic in its simplicity. In a world overwhelmed by noise and distraction, 143 became Fred's quiet way of saying what mattered most. What are your thoughts on Fred's legacy? Share your feelings in the comments.